After you returned as part of the advance team to Missoula, Montana, and you were there for about 30 days. Tell me some of the things that you did and what happened during that time.
I mentioned earlier that I had arrived in Miami on July 31, 1945. I had to go to Fort Douglas, Utah, and I recall that I traveled by troop train most of the time, and it took 4 or 5 days to get there. Then from there, it took me a couple of days to get on up to Missoula. So I would estimate that I got home about the 7th of July, somewhere in there. After I got to Missoula is when they dropped the atomic bombs on Japan. I don't recall the date. I think it was August 8th. And I may have been wrong earlier when I mentioned the date there, but anyway, we heard that they dropped the bombs, and then the next thing we heard was that Japan had surrendered. Well, I was pretty sure that if Japan had surrendered, that we probably wouldn't have to go on to the Far East. So I did report back to Camp Carson, and I did not have enough points to get discharged at that time. Being that I was an officer, I had to have considerably more points than if I had stayed an enlisted man. So in December of 1945, I was assigned to Fort Ord, California. And while I was at Fort Ord, I served as a company commander, and I had charge of a company that processed troops that were going to be sent to the Far East to relieve the veterans who were over there so they could come home. Our duty was simply to get in 200 men. We had to make sure they had all of their dental work done, they had to have their physical exams, and they had to be completely outfitted to go to the Far East. We did not take them out into the field and train them. It was simply an administrative position. So I stayed there at Fort Ord until April of 1946. Then I had acquired enough points to be discharged, but I had to go to Camp Hale, California, where I was separated from the military. After I got out of the service, I then went to Seattle by train, and then by train from Seattle over to Missoula. So I arrived there sometime toward the end of August of 1945.
At Camp Carson, when you were stationed there as part of the advance team, did you meet someone significant?
I sure did. My wife, who is a Finnish nurse from Minnesota, had been assigned to Camp Carson as a cadet nurse. She was not a commissioned officer, but she had all the privileges of a commissioned officer. A group of us one night were at the officers club having a beer, just spending the evening, and the cadet nurses walked in. There were 7 or 8 of them, and we got acquainted and danced and got very well acquainted with him. So I started dating her, and things became rather serious. She had an opportunity to go back to Minnesota and complete her degree work at Army expense, which she did. So when I went back to Minneapolis in September of 1946, she was already there, and we started dating, and we were married about a year after I started to school. In fact, I was already in law school by the time we got married.
And what is her name?
Her maiden name was Verna J. Risenen, but everybody calls her Rise.
I also neglected to ask you if you received any citations or commendations for your service.
Well, I received the normal ribbons for overseas duty in the Mediterranean Theater and the Italian Theater, and in Italy I received a Bronze Star.
Could you tell me the circumstances of your winning the Bronze Star?
Yes, we were trying to take some ground on a small hill, and we were receiving fairly heavy small arms fire. So rather than subject my men to that, I reconnoitered another route. I was within view of the Germans, and I was fired at several times, but I found a better way to approach the area where they were, so I went back, got the platoon, took them safely up through this other route, and we captured the Germans on top of the mountain, so I received a Bronze Star for that.
Do you recall the day that your military service ended?
Yes, it was April 16th, 1946.
And where were you?
I was, well, I had left Fort Ord and I was at Camp Hale when I was separated. Now, I stayed in the reserve, Tom, and stayed in the reserve in the infantry, and I was assigned to a unit in Minnesota. As soon as I got my law degree, I was contacted by the Judge Advocate General's Department of the Air Force, and I was asked whether I wanted to transfer in grade and use my law degree and my law training. So I agreed to that, and I was transferred from the Infantry Reserve to the Air Force Reserve about August of 1950.
Did your military experience influence your thinking about the war or the military in general?
Well, I think I realized better how many people were involved, what a large-scale operation the war was, how many people were involved, how many countries. There were two separate theaters of operation, the Pacific as compared to Europe. And I also realized how much damage was done, say, in Europe particularly, and what a hard time the civilians had. So I think I had a better appreciation for all aspects of a major conflict.
You have in front of you a photo album, and we have marked the upper right-hand corner numbering each of the front sides of the pages, the first page number 1. Could you just explain where these photographs in general came from? For example, who took them and what time period they represent?
Most of these pictures were taken by Clifford Smith, who was my runner, and I mentioned him earlier. He was wounded when he was right with me one day there in the front lines. He took most of these pictures. Page 1 are some pictures that were taken in Venice after the war, and the back side of that was taken in Rome when he apparently was on leave in Rome. Page 2 is a collection of pictures of men who were in our platoon. There's a picture here of Cliff Smith, Danny Fantoni, and Rube Shimke, who was the platoon sergeant.
Could you identify if the photographs are numbered on that page?
Yes, Cliff Smith is number 7, Rube Shimke's number 11, and Danny Fantoni is number 8.
Thank you.
The back side of that is also some pictures that were taken of a swim meet that Cliff attended, so I really don't know where it was taken, and I can't identify the people in that on that particular page. Page 3 was also taken at the swim meet, and the only picture I can identify is number 28, which is a picture of Cliff Smith. The reverse side of that is also taken mostly where this swim meet occurred, although there is a picture of me, which is number 37, and there's a picture of some of the K Company people at picture 40.
Where is the picture of you taken on that
That was
sheet?
taken in the Apennines, and I believe it was on the backside of Mount Belvedere. Now, page 4 was more of K Company. Jack Clancy is shown in picture 41, Dan Fantoni in 42, Ralph Glaze, who was a sergeant in the company, and Jack Clancy are in picture 43, Clancy in picture 44 and 47, and in picture 45 is Fred Burmaster, who was a very good soldier in our platoon. The reverse side of that shows Steve Janovic and Dick Engelbert in picture 49. Picture 50 shows Guy May and 2 other soldiers. Picture 51 is Norm Ergot, who was our company clerk. Picture 53 is a picture of our company barber, and 55 is another picture of Jack Clancy. On page 5, there's a picture of Boldy Wakefield. His first name was Bruce. 51 is a picture, 57 is a picture of myself sitting near my foxhole, and it looks like it's really cluttered. 58 is again Cliff Smith and another soldier. 63 is another picture of me. I'm standing in my foxhole, and I believe I was censoring some mail at that time.
Do you know where either picture 57 or 58 were taken of you?
63, I believe, was again the reverse side of Belvedere. I don't know about the other one. The back side of that, the girl in the picture was the singer in the Dartega Orchestra. She was visiting some of the men in the hospital. Some of our men were there at the time. The other pictures are pictures of Italians from the town of Prunetta. Picture 70 on page 6 is Rube Shemke, who took over as platoon sergeant after Schubert took off. 71 is Clinton Fleener, and he was the squad leader of the first squad. The pictures that show the troops and the one of my holding a young girl in my arms were taken in Venice. I was holding her up so she could see the British Army parading in Venice Square. There's some other pictures here in the album. Some of these were taken at Camp Hale before we went overseas. Picture 82 is a picture of myself taken in the summer with a big rucksack on my back. Picture 83 is myself and Tony Bianca. Picture 84 is another picture of myself. And on the opposite side are some pictures of some men from E Company.
I think there's one more page of photos left under there, or a couple more perhaps.
These pictures on pages,
Don't think we've numbered those
I don't
yet.
think they're unnumbered, but they're in the back of the album. When we were transferred to Fort Ord, Dick Hardy, who was an officer, a very good friend of mine, had a Ford automobile, and we drove from Camp Carson out to Fort Ord. We stopped at Yosemite and went skiing for a few days, and we were joined by Carl Caracas and another officer whose name I do not know. And these pictures were all taken at Yosemite National Park.
Very good. Thanks for running through those photos. Um, Did your service in the 10th Mountain Division affect the amount and interest, the amount of skiing that you did and your interest in skiing over the long term?
It certainly did. I became a proficient skier in the Army, but I would not describe myself as a good skier or as an expert skier. But after the war, we purchased a home at Frisco, Colorado, and I bought some stock at Arapahoe Basin, and I had enough stock so our family could all ski free. So we spent our weekends in the wintertime at Frisco, and we skied at primarily Arapahoe Basin. Occasionally we go over and ski Vail or Loveland. And I've skied every year since that, and I think I did become a fairly good skier during those years.
Did you end up joining the National Association of the 10th Mountain Division, the Veterans Organization, after the war?
Yes, I joined it many years ago. I belong to the Rocky Mountain chapter, and I have attended a lot of their reunions, both in this country and twice in Europe. I made a vow while I was in Italy that I'd never go back there. But after 40 years, in 1985, Bryce talked me into joining the group of the 10th Mountain. We went to Italy and we thoroughly enjoyed it, so we went back again in 1988.
Did you make any other vows when you were in Italy?
Yes, the night that I recall, we left Camp Hale after dark, and our battalion was to move up Resolution Creek to Ptarmigan Peak, and we were going to dig in and hold that against whatever outfit was supposed to attack us. We broke trail for the entire battalion, and it was hard work. My platoon and squad did most of that work, and it was hard work breaking through the snow and making 2 trails up there in the night. As I got up close to Ptarmigan Peak, I swore that if I ever lived through the war, I would never cross-country ski again, and I haven't. I use the term now, I tell everybody, no toe, no go.
How about your service for the 10th Mountain Division Foundation? Could you discuss that briefly?
Yes, I joined the foundation as a member of the board of directors, perhaps 20 years ago, and I served on the board and on numerous committees. I, of course, attended their annual meeting and worked on some of the committees. In 1993, I became president of the foundation, and I served in that capacity for 9 years. I am now still on the board, but I am on the board as an emeritus chairman of the board.
Very good. Let's take a short break. After a short break, we're continuing with the oral history of Eugene S. Hames. You have written your life story, and there's a copy of it in front of you. In particular, there's one photograph that you wanted to comment on in that life story.
I don't know whether you could see this too well, but this is a picture of myself. I had been up on the front lines for approximately 2 months, and I got a chance to go back for a rest. So I got back to Montecatini, Italy. That's quite a resort area. They have a lot of spas there. There's natural hot water, and they used it for rest and recuperation. And this shows me first day I got down there, I had a can of beer, and you notice in this picture I'm also smoking a cigarette, but that was before I quit smoking.
Very good, thank you.
Does that, you think the picture come through all right?
I think it did. You can see it, and plus we have the original here.
Yeah.
After you finished law school at the University of Minnesota, what did you do next?
Well, I took the Minnesota bar and passed it, but but I decided I did not want to practice in Minneapolis. So Rise and I moved to Denver in August of 1950. I had a hard time getting a job at first because I had to take the Colorado bar exam, and that wasn't going to be given until December of that year. But I got a job as a clerk in the city attorney's office and worked there until I took the bar exam. I was admitted to practice in Colorado in March of 1951, and at that time I was appointed as an assistant city attorney. And for a period of several months, I did a lot of trial work for the city attorney's office. We were prosecuting ordinance violations in the police court and the appeals in the county court. I later, and I'm not quite sure of the date of this, I had a chance to go to work for the Office of Salary Stabilization with the federal government. I went there because they were paying about 3 times what I was making as an assistant city attorney, and I worked there until December of 1952. At that time, I joined a small law firm that consisted of 2 individuals, Edward L. Wood and William K. Riss. The firm was known as Wood and Riss. In 1954, we changed the name to Wood, Riss and Hames, and I stayed with that firm until I retired in 1990. During my years of practice, I devoted almost all of my time to trying civil jury trials in the courts in Colorado and several cases in Wyoming. Primarily, I was a defense attorney. We represented quite a number of insurance companies, and I defended a lot of cases involving personal injuries, products liability, and the last couple of years I was in practice, I did a lot of legal malpractice defense work. During the time that I practiced, I belonged to the Denver and Colorado Bar Associations and the American Bar Association. I was a founding member of the Ski Lawyers Defense Association, and I did quite a bit of ski defense work for some of the major areas in Colorado and Wyoming. I also belonged to the Federation of Insurance Council, and the highlight of my career, I was inducted into the American College of Trial Attorneys, which is probably the most prestigious legal organization in the United States.
Thank you. I think with those comments on your career, that ends the oral history. I'd like to say what a privilege it's been to have conducted the interview, and to thank you both for sharing your stories and for your service in the military. So thank you. That concludes the interview.
Thank you, Tom.